So a little bit about who we are is really just a play-based clinic. We really believe that it's so important to this idea of pioneering back to play. But we've gotten so far away from play for children. Right now there's screens and this fast-paced world. But really who we are at Buttonloop, and we believe that this is so true of Magical Beginnings too, is meeting children where they are at developmentally and just really honing the skills of childhood. And our hope is that by creating an inclusive world that welcomes everyone, and doesn't see any limits or barriers to what a child can do, we can unlock their potential to change the world. Um, and so a little bit about what we offer at Buttonloop Children's Therapies. Like I had mentioned, speech therapy and occupational therapy. And speech therapy is pretty all-encompassing. So it's everything about communication, from articulation, which is how we move our mouth to produce speech. So sometimes we say that like we can't really understand what a child's saying, and that would fall under that articulation domain. Receptive language, which is what a child understands, and expressive language, which is what a child says. And a newer addition to the field that some people might be hearing about is myofunctional therapy. And so what that has to do with is the muscles in the mouth and how kids use that. And sometimes the barrier is the connection between the brain and the mouth and how you send that message. And other times it's actually the physiology of the mouth and teaching kids to use that differently. Occupational therapy, this is always so funny to talk about with parents and other providers. And I just really sum it down to the occupation of play. So when we think about it that way, I feel like people are used to hearing about occupational therapy for adults after they have a stroke, and we want them to learn to be able to write their name or, put on their shoes. And for kids, it's really different. It is the occupation of play, and that is everything from being able to sit, to attend, to regulate your body and your emotions so that you can engage with toys and other peers. So it's really all encompassing of that. And then also the fine motor, how you're holding a crayon. And this is, if people are familiar with OT in the pediatric population, this is typically what they are more used to seeing, but scissor skills, holding a crayon or a marker to be able to do arts and crafts sort of activities. It also lines up with gross motor, and this has to do with like how you identify and take in sensory input for where your body is in space. Sensory processing, and I already talked a little bit about attention and regulation. For feeding, our clinicians, we have both speech therapists and occupational therapists who are trained in feeding therapies. So on one side, associated with that myofunctional therapy can be kids who have a hard time figuring out that motor pattern of chewing, or just picky eaters, failures to thrive, or the newest diagnosis falling under feeding therapy is RFID, which is avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. So when kids are just really overly picky about what they're going to eat, and for specific reasons. The other area that we work on is social skills. And a lot of times people think about this under the autism spectrum domain, but especially post-COVID, this is something that comes up for quite a few kids, just figuring out how to successfully navigate these social situations that have been quite fearful, that parents have been quite fearful of engaging in over the past couple of years. And so our services are typically covered under insurance. So you have that on this slide. We're in network with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Harvard Pilgrim, Health Plans Inc., Always, United with Passport Connect. I have Health Plans Inc. twice, sorry about that, and private pay options as well. And so a little bit about why we're partnering with Magical Beginnings. One thing is like I said before, just so excited about the mission of Magical Beginnings that really is and truly is about meeting kids where they are at and encouraging this development at every child's own pace, in ways that are really developmentally appropriate for each child. Um, and one of the other reasons is Amy and I are working parents too. I have my 3 kids. Like, I don't even know. My husband had doors open upstairs. I'm downstairs. We spent like a good 30 minutes deciding where would be the best place for me to do this. And I'm like, if this door opens once, I'm coming up there. So I think one of the things that we're really passionate about is bringing this service to other working parents. Amy and I know what it's like to, put a full day in at work and then to have something that you have to work on with your kids. My middle child has dyslexia, and I feel like I'm always coming home from work and like, we got to do some reading. We got to do some reading. But I'm pretty exhausted. So this is really an offering for you. We know that Magical Beginnings is amazing at how many things they bring in just one place, and we want to be part of that too, helping you in your village and your network and being a resource for you. And this is a slide talking a little bit about what we do. And the first one is like actually what I look like as a parent. I was actually upstairs changing and my kids are like, "What are you doing? It's not morning. Have you totally lost your mind?" Because typically when I come home, this is what I look like. My kids like want to play and they want to be doing something. And I am completely exhausted. But that's where we come in, and that's where Magical Beginnings comes in, having these amazing, rich opportunities for your kids to do. And like, look at this picture that I found. It's like Play-Doh with like glitter in it. I don't want my kids doing that at home. So that's what we're here for you to be able to explore that at Magical Beginnings and for us to bring these services to you. And we also had a photographer come into our clinic to take pictures, and it's like, this picture is hysterical. I don't think we got a single good picture of me because it was realistic and I'm actually working with my patients and I've always got this kooky look on my face. But that's really it. I think it's all about meeting kids where they are. I have like a permanent hunchback from leaning over a table like that, but just so being on the level of the kids and so being there in that interaction that's actually what my face looks like when I'm working with children. And so a little bit about how our partnership is going to be working. So, Magical Beginnings will be offering free screenings from Buttonloop Therapy. And so the way it will all start is teacher documentation. So the teacher might notice some area that your child needs help in, which all of us need help sometimes, but just being able to notice and identify some key features. So the Magical Beginnings teacher would document this in terms of what's happening. John threw the puzzle toward the wall, or you can't understand 50% of what Emma's saying. And from that point, the teacher will talk to the director of each individual Magical Beginnings center and discuss these concerns with the parents, and then begin the process of adding resources. And we are one of those resources. So Magical Beginnings will be distributing screening flyers that will, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then if any families are interested, then you can return this slide at the end of the week by Friday, October 7th, and we'll start scheduling those screenings. So the next step in this process is actually completing those screenings. So that would be done with one of our licensed occupational therapists or speech therapists, and that would be done on site. So once you complete your screening, there's really nothing else for you to do. Magical Beginnings and Buttonloop Children's Therapy will take care of everything else. And that screening is really just a little dipstick of, is there an area that we think that services with an occupational therapist or a speech therapist could help? After the screening, the therapist will be sending home a brief, and again, that's on the next slides, a brief summary of the screening. And we will be talking to Magical Beginnings directors after that and talking about on-site services for patients, which would begin begin in early November. So here's what the permission to screen form looks like. And really, like I said, this is just a 10 to 15 minute screen that is done with a licensed speech language pathologist or occupational therapist. And it's just a quick check-in of, I am having a hard time understanding this child, or, there might be concerns about grip on a crayon. And so again, you can just opt in. So the two options are, no, I don't have any concerns and don't need to be screened, or yes, I do have some concerns. And you can include that down at the bottom, what your concerns are. And again, it has all the logistics on there, such as insurances that we accept. But just reiterating that these are all free screenings. That would just be if you chose to move on with an evaluation. And here's two samples of what our screen looks like. And so this is a speech therapy screen, and we just talk about areas that are either in functional limits or areas that might be a concern area or areas that are not observed at all. And then a brief little description of what the clinician actually saw, so that you can get the sense of, yes, that's my child, or no, that sounds a little bit off. And again, here is one for occupational therapy, and it just talks a little bit about, again, within functional limits or concern area or not observed. And there'll be some information too about digital pronate grasp, or scribbling, or something that's age appropriate. But again, we'll come with some information. And then there are service delivery options. So like I said before, we do want to be able to offer on-site services, and that would be based on, we would connect with the directors and, see how that would work. So one option would be on-site services, and then the other option would be in-clinic services. And there are some times where in-clinic services might be preferred, and that would be if there's specific concerns, especially in the OT realm, where we need some of our specialized equipment to address those. So the OT room is well stocked with climbing equipment that help kids use reciprocal stepping patterns, or suspended equipment from the ceiling that helps kids regulate their body a little bit more to increase attention and focus. In talking a little bit about what we're offering to the Magical Beginnings community for your children's teachers. So really, it's important to us to have this classroom resource and this classroom connection to the teachers all the way through development. And so I put some of these slides in here, just hitting on that normal, typical developmental pattern that we'd like to see for children. So up in the beginning, my husband, when we first had children, was like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what to do with a baby. But there's those of us that love babies and this peekaboo. But at the very beginning, we're starting to set up some of that social reciprocal interactions for kids. And then we move on into the toddler ages, where kids start this crawling pattern. And it's so important. It's their first part of using each side of their body differently as they start to move along on the floor. And it's a really important part of development. And then all the way up into, at the preschool age, where kids are starting to share imagination, and moving past just that my turn, my turn, your turn, but really into that shared imagination and, establishing those play schemas for how things are going to look later on as they're adults. And then straight up through, these, kids that are ready to go off to kindergarten, and they're moving from like that blanket playing peekaboo all the way to, sitting at this table and doing this really, really hard work. So this is some of what we're hoping to bring to Magical Beginnings, is strengthening these developmental milestones, but also how we can meet that with different tools, or how we can step in when it's not following that pattern exactly. So these are some tools that we will be planning on bringing to Magical Beginnings community. But I just have a few here where these are rock crayons that our OTs love for being able to establish more of that appropriate grasp for crayon use, or squigs that are also a huge hit in our OT gym. And it helps develop wrist extension and strength. And our speech therapists love this toy down here from Learning Resources with the little presents, and you open it up and it's this great opportunity for language stimulation, both expressively and receptively. And then this great little cushion tool here that helps kids stay focused. So some kids' bodies just need to move, and it doesn't mean that they're not listening. It just means that their body needs to move so that their ears are working and their attention can be focused on you. So exploring that more with each of the teachers and directors at Magical Beginnings. And then I love this because parents really are the experts on their child. No one knows your children better than you. And so I love this idea of empowering parents to be able to follow through on some of this stuff. And like I said, I'm a working parent too. So it's car talk is mine. I will do this with my kids, especially when they were younger, and just work on different things in the car, because that was the time that I was like, hey guys, my attention is totally on you and this road. But being able to develop some language when you're in the car. And so you might develop categories by doing I spy types of transportation, or I spy things that go in the sky, or I spy things that are yellow. And so this is a real opportunity to develop those language skills. Or another game that I used to play with my kids when they were little, is we pretended to have an underwater adventure, and the shared imagination that came out of that, was amazing. And so we'd all be like strapped in, and it would be, we're going into the ocean. What do you think we're going to see down here? And guys, that was like only on my really good days when I had had a lot of coffee. Don't think that I was doing that on any regular basis. But it was every now and then. My kids are 8 and 10 and will still ask for it on occasion, because it was just so fun. Another thing to practice too is articulation. So when your kids are having a hard time producing certain things, I love doing it in the car because you've got their attention. And so we'll do, every time we come to a stop sign, you need to tell me, okay, let's put our snake sound on. Every time we see a stop sign, stop. And it's a great way to build that skill, but also that carryover. So they're starting to catch it and they're like, wait, I see a stop sign. We have to use our sound. Or for OT, I have art up in this house. So snapping those crayons, I showed you the rock crayons that help to establish that better grasp, small crayons. And this is painful to me. I know I should do it. And when we happen to get a new package of crayons, I'm always like, oh, but they're so pretty. But it does really help with that wrist extension, and being able to isolate the digits for drawing. Another great activity is wall drawing for wrist extension and hand strength. And so this can be accomplished like with an easel. It's one of the reasons that easels are still so important for kids, because most of us do not want to tape a piece of paper to our wall and encourage wall drawing. But it is great in developing that wrist extension and hand strength. And then double duty bath time. This is another, in my own practice now, when I work with people who have young children, I talk a lot about the bath, because the car and the bath are 2 times when I'm really there with my kids and able to access them. And so talking about when you're developing language skills, just using the same word over and over and over again. And I frequently say to parents, when you're at the point that you feel like you're going to lose your mind if you say it one more time, that's the point where kids are like, maybe I should try saying this word too. So I really love anything that's repetitive. Books like Brown Bear, What Do You See? And then holding off the end word to see if kids will start to use that. And then building joint attention and joint affect with water play. Another element of development is how important that joint attention and joint affect is. And it's one of the reasons that I picked that peekaboo slide to be one of my baby slides, because joint attention and joint affect is really the basis for everything that we do as children straight through to adults. And if you think of yourself getting together with a friend and like you're telling a really funny story and your friend is sitting there with completely flat affect, it's not enjoyable. So this is something that's valuable from, infancy, toddlerhood, right through to adulthood. And then for OT, talking a little bit about regulation and self-care. The last slide, I touched on OT a little bit, but coming back to that a little bit more. So I have this, some of the stuff in here. I have is so funny. There's this bento box and this idea of like making food really fun for your kids and having it accessible. So they just have to open one container. And I put this on as a chuckle to myself because one of my friends on Facebook, like, I don't know, 8 years ago when I had like a 2-year-old, was showing a bento box of what she was packing her son. And I was like, we can't be friends anymore. It like had like cut up fruits and vegetables and a sandwich shaped like a star. And I was like, that is so lovely for you. I didn't even get to shower before I left for work this morning. So I put this one on as a little chuckle to help me get through all of these slides. In this self-care, having kids being able to put on their own coats. And I love this, the OTs call it donning and doffing their shoes, which makes it sound so sophisticated. But just this idea of how kids take care of themselves and how we can support them. And one way to do that is doing the task for them almost all the way and then letting them do just the last step. And this technique is called like chaining. So we break the task down into little steps until the child is doing just the last part of it. Like we put their foot in the shoe and now they just have to put their heel down. But now we lift the tongue for them and they have to insert their foot and then push their heel down until finally we're offering the shoe and they're putting their foot in, they're opening the shoe, putting their foot all the way in and ready to go on their own. And regulation is another piece that's really big. And we're seeing it a lot post-pandemic with so much anxiety. I think as we're still, as working parents are still coming back from this exhaustion of having to have been teacher and therapist and housekeeper and working parent and all of this in one. So regulation is something that we're seeing a lot in the clinic right now and something that our OTs work on. But I love a timer is actually my favorite regulation tool. And so it takes the pressure off off of myself and off of the child. So I can just say, I'm going to set a timer. And when I set a timer, when the timer goes off, TV time is done. And so we teach kids to be able to react to the timer. And then we're not in there as a parent saying, okay, like we're going to turn it off now. And the kid's saying, one more minute. So I know in my house, when my kids were younger, we lived and died by this timer. Another strategy that I really love is forced choices. And so we're going into the parking lot. Do you want to hold my left hand or my right hand? And so we've already got this idea of what a child's going to do. And this is a way to help them with regulation. We're teaching them that safety awareness. But also we're letting them have some control over that situation. So you can decide if you hold my left hand or my right hand, but you're going to hold one of my hands. And then in feeding therapy can be so fun. This is for picky eaters and problem feeders. And usually we identify picky eaters as if you're going to your pediatrician and you're like, oh my gosh, over like multiple pediatric visits, you're reporting that your child is a picky eater, or a child who's really brand specific about things and they'll only eat Tyson chicken nuggets. Then these are kids who can benefit from feeding therapy. And so I have talking a little bit about the sensory hierarchy first. I should have reversed these pictures, but in my sensory hierarchy, kids can't just look at food and then eat it. We think that there's just two processes in picking up food and putting it in your mouth to eat. But there's really this whole desensitization process that has to happen for children who are picky eaters. And so what we want kids to be able to do is to interact with food with their hands. Can you touch the food? Can you look at the food? And kids who are really picky eaters or problem feeders can't even look at food on their plate. So you see that barrier even for the sensory, the visual sensory aspect of it. And so if kids can't look at it, we want to work on that first, but we're not even going to get to the point of touching it. But you eventually want to get kids to the point where they're touching it, and maybe can they just push it off their plate into the trash with their finger, and that's like, whoa, amazing. Or I've also, when I've been fortunate enough to stop into some of the feeding sessions, just really being silly. And so we want kids to get the food up to their mouth, and I might be balancing a piece of food on my shoulder and pretending that I'm a pirate and that's my parrot, and then talking to it. So I'm turning my face toward that food. It's getting close to my mouth, but there's not the pressure of putting it in. And then all the way up to this picture here where, this parent and child are playing with spaghetti. And this is great. It's right near the child's mouth. It's under his nose. He's smelling it, and there's still not the pressure of eating it. Other ways to chain up this hierarchy is entirely to play with food. So instead of using a paintbrush, you might use a broccoli floret for painting. Or instead of, building with blocks and making a road for your trucks, you might drive them across yogurt. So just creating more fun around food. And that's some of what our feeding therapists work on. And then the second component of this is food chaining. So not thinking about eating a fish stick, but reframing the hierarchy of what food is. So this is a brown stick. Here's a graham cracker. Here's a piece of a graham cracker, and this is a brown stick. Here's a fish stick, and this is a brown stick. And so being able to present it to kids that way. And so I have this slide right here where you can look at, if you pull out those blue and green Skittles, they're just little balls. So they're little blue balls, there's little green balls. And so you're not thinking about eating peas, you're interacting with just these little circles that you can smash. You could make art with them. What's it going to look like if we try to smash a blueberry? And so, oh, that's awesome. It really explodes on the page. And what does it look like if we try to smash a Skittle? Oh, that's boring. It just falls right off. So being able to reframe how kids think about food. And now we have some time where I will start with some of the frequently asked questions, and we'll open it up for opportunities for parents to, and you can just put your questions in the chat. And Lindsay, do you want to jump in too? So we'll have parents, if they have broad questions, put them in the chat. So anything about like therapy processes, or even how to work on something developmentally with your children at home. But I'll just start talking a little bit about what some of the frequently asked questions that we thought of. So what screening methodologies are used? So the clinician will come in with, like I showed you, we have some things that are just in our toolbox that we use in order to capitalize on that time. So the clinician would come in with toys or maybe different strategies that she's going to use to elicit a certain response. So our OTs might come in with scissors and crayons, or our speech language pathologist might come in with toys that elicit more language development. And then after the screening, so again, these screenings are free. Am I required to opt in for services? Absolutely not. So your clinician would identify areas, and you might say, I want to just work on this at home, or this is so great to know. And, maybe down the road, it would be something that we're interested in. So you're absolutely not required to opt in for services. My child has not been flagged by their teacher as needing support, but I'd like them to be screened. So this round of screenings is happening, like I said, the forms are due back on Friday, and then we'll be having clinicians scheduled to go out and complete these screenings. And we are anticipating doing it regularly throughout the year. So if your child is not identified in this round, then you can certainly discuss these concerns with your teacher, and we can look at that at a later date. What if my child is screened and a follow-up evaluation is recommended, but Buttonloop doesn't accept my insurance? So we encourage families to call the member number on the back of your card in order to get in-network facilities. If we are not a facility, then that's what we would encourage you to do, to call that number, and they would give you a list of all approved providers. And then there are private pay options as well if we're not in network with your specific insurance company. How do I get feedback if services are on site? So our clinicians, we believe in a really individualized model of therapy, which means that our clinicians' schedules are not jam-packed. So they would have opportunities throughout the day to schedule phone calls, or if you feel that a phone call is hard for you to schedule, then they could just simply send email feedback to you on things that they've worked on and that you can be implementing at home. My Child Center, so services might not be available on site for all Magical Beginnings locations. And so if your Child Center is not offering on-site options for Buttonloop Children's Therapies, then we would be happy to fast track those services at our clinic. So those are some of what I have. Oh, and my last slide was just thanking you all for being here and being a part of this.
Thank you so much, Jeanette. That was wonderful. We have some questions that came in, so I'm just going to read them off to you.
Sure.
So how would these services integrate with other services that my child is receiving elsewhere?
Yeah. So one thing I will say is if your child is getting services through another facility, then there are billing restrictions. So for example, you couldn't have speech therapy or occupational therapy twice in one day. But if those other services are early intervention services, or, a preschooler might be going to the public preschool program one day a week for speech, those are services that we would connect with those service providers to make sure that everyone is on the same page. And we do this frequently, especially with early intervention services. Sometimes those providers are only able to come out once a month, and children might be needing more services than that. So we're really able to do that check-in and that follow-up with those providers to make sure that that clinician is updating her goals appropriately.
Okay, and the next question is, my son could use help with articulation and picky eating. My insurance has a speech therapy benefit, but would these two issues be handled with separate therapy sessions?
No, so we do feeding therapy and speech therapy together. So that is typically both completed by a speech language pathologist. So those would just be lumped. We could do them at the same time simultaneously.
Okay, great. The next question is about the screening sheets. Where can we find the screening sheets? And I believe we're going to be distributing those at the schools, correct?
I believe so, right?
The screening forms, the permission forms. Yep. The next question is, how do I get on the same page with my partner? I.e., mom has advocated for playing with food to help a picky eater, but the father resists it. How do you convince your partner?
So a lot of times I am such a proponent of knowledge is power. There's a great resource, SOS Approach to Feeding, that I really encourage anyone to look at. There's a tab on there that says Parents and Caregiver Workshop. And so it's about 2 hours. So it's a decent time commitment, but I will say that you end up getting a lot of information from this, and just presenting that to someone. I feel like when you really see the steps of feeding broken down and taken apart like that, it's amazing that anyone eats. So I would encourage just sharing resources. A pediatrician can be another great resource. So if one parent is having a hard time, then reaching out to the pediatrician and letting that information come from them.
Okay. Someone's just looking for clarity on the screening process. Are all children at Magical Beginnings being evaluated by teachers first, and then getting or is it kids getting recommended for screenings? Can you talk a little bit more about the process of screenings?
Yeah, so the process of screenings is that the teacher would initially identify areas of concern and be documenting that, and connect with the director. And then the teacher would reach out to parents, caregivers, in order to share that information. And from there, a screening might be recommended. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then there would be opt-ins. So let's say your child is receiving services, but they haven't necessarily been flagged. Then you could certainly talk to your teacher about that to be flagged for another round.
Okay. How many clinicians do you employ?
Oh my gosh, Amy, what is it? 20. Oh, wait, Amy, you're muted. I'm sorry. I'm tapping Amy in for this one.
Yeah, it's around 20. And that's a mix of feeding specialists, occupational therapists. We have some literacy people, some speech therapists, but yeah, it's around 20.
Do you accept Mass Health?
Unfortunately, we do not. So Mass Health options are typically through the larger hospital system. So I would encourage you, I know Spalding Salem has a very long wait list right now, but there's Spalding Lexington, which is an option, and they're typically able to move along a little bit quicker. There is Winchester Hospital in Wilmington at their Wilmington site that is an option. There's Mass Health in Revere and Chelsea have outpatient clinics. But typically that would be the larger hospital sites. There are no small clinics that are, or I don't know of any private clinics that are in network with Mass Health.
We have a question about the private pay rates. Is that something you would want people to reach out directly to you about?
I don't even have that information. Amy, do you have that? Oh, you're muted again. Sorry.
You're muted, Amy.
Yeah, so we can reach out to directly on the private pay. Typically it's 105 for speech, and OT sessions run a little longer to make sure the child is regulated before we approach on the therapy place, and that's about 120.
Someone asked if we're going to be, we are recording this, so we are going to be sharing the recording with people after this. Someone asked about that. The screening permission forms, we will be sending those out in the next few days.
On the timeline thing, I think we were hoping to get those back the end of the week, so I can follow up. Yeah, I can follow up after just to make sure you have the form and everything you need so we can get that out as soon as possible.
Perfect. If we have a feeding issue and sensory issues, are those addressed in one session, or would the child need 2 separate sessions?
That's a great question. So feeding and sensory can really go hand in hand. So if it is sensory in terms of like regulation and vestibular and proprioceptive, so those are the kids who have difficulty with sensory and they're kind of like, all over the place. They might have a hard time with attention, then that might be addressed separately. But if it's sensory as related to feeding and touching the food and processing that texture, then that would be completed together.
Okay. When would we know which sites will have on-site services?
November 1st, right, Amy? You're muted.
I know. I think I just automatically, it's okay. This is what my whole family does to me. I'm muted all the time. Yeah. So we would really want those permission slips back, ideally the end of the week, wiggle room for Monday, but that'll help us screen the next couple of weeks. And then we'll want to hear back from parents who are flagged as being recommended for evaluations October 10th through the 17th. And then by that, I mean, October 26th is when we want you to say, hey, I would like to move forward with an evaluation. And then that way, that'll give us a week to determine with Magical Beginnings where the greatest need is. And then we can build that on-site plan so that we start services early November. So once we get all that information, we'll be in a much better place to say, okay, it's Middleton, it's Peabody, these are great fits because they have the highest need.
Yeah, and I think we're, to make it, we're the best, for everyone and the children to get the best services. It's, like Amy said, we're going to see where the most need is in which schools and where they can kind of focus their clinicians. And then someone asked, how long are the service sessions?
Sure. So speech therapy is typically completed in a half an hour. We find that that's most appropriate for the attention span for the children to be able to really work on and isolate those specific articulation or language skills. And then the occupational therapy sessions are about 45 to 50 minutes. Again, to factor in that time for regulation and just follow through on those services.
And I misspoke. It's about 20 speech therapists and then 7 OTs. So it's around 27 clinicians.
I don't have any other questions in the chat here. If anyone else has questions that they want to ask, feel free to pop them on. And if people want to reach out directly to Buttonloop for questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
So the best way is in that presentation, there's a couple of different ways to contact us. One is that if you have a call or an email that you want to send, it, email admin@buttonloop.com. So that's on the last page of the slide is our email address, and we'll make sure that we get those flagged to whoever is the right person to be handling that. The other way to get in touch with us is call us. We have a front desk that's literally staffed pretty much around the clock outside of Saturday and Sunday. So there's always like a friendly person picking up the phone, and that phone number is 978-535-3355. It's also included in that last page of the slide. Our website is there too. We recently changed our name, so it is confusing. So if you type in North Shore or Buttonloop, you'll be directed to our website, which is Buttonloop Therapies. If you prefer, we didn't even talk about this, but if you really want your child seen in Peabody and don't want that in our location and don't want to do on-site at Magical Beginnings, there's also an intake form right on our website for new patients if you want to get started. But all of that is in that last page of the presentation that we'll send out. So,
and then if a child is approved for services and they are happening on site at Magical Beginnings, where would those services be done, in the classroom or in a separate area?
So that would be best determined by what's being targeted. So for example, if a child has, severe articulation difficulties where there's really a need for more intense placement and therapy cues, then that would be done outside of the classroom environment. But if a child is working on social pragmatic language and building some of those language skills as it relates to peers, then in the classroom would be the best service delivery model. So it would really be individualized based on each child's needs.
And to clarify that too a little bit, if it is happening at Magical Beginnings, the services will be in the classroom. And if they need services that, can't be accomplished in the classroom, then you will refer them to do something at your facility in Peabody, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Any other questions? All right. Curious as to how teachers will flag students as to being a student who needs, and when this will happen, or if it is already happening.
So Lindsay, I think that that would be a better question for Magical Beginnings. We have received a list of children that have documentation, meaning that parent has been contacted by teacher. But that if you could follow up with that, or maybe in follow up after this call, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have Magical Beginnings has steps that they take, to, identify things and loop the parents in as well.
And I think this is an ongoing relationship with Magical Beginnings. So our hope is that we come back in the spring and do some more screens. We do screens all the time in Peabody as well. So, we can arrange for that as per needed for over a certain period of time, just so that, if you're feeling like you weren't flagged and you would like to flag because you have concerns, then we can screen. If you're not concerned by anything and haven't been flagged by a teacher, it's probably not helpful for us to screen, just to screen, but we're happy to put eyes on kids that either you have concerns about or a teacher has flagged in our Peabody site too.
And then we also just wanted to mention Arlene, who is our, full-time social worker on staff. So she is also very involved in, students who I'm sure, some of your families have worked with Arlene, and she will also be a resource. And then Laura, our senior managing director, will also be involved as well in the process. And then someone asked about on-site services. It's really going to depend about, how many schools they're asking which schools will be having it. It really depends on the need at the school. And obviously the clinicians at Buttonloop, their, availability and time and things like that. Just kind of coordinating that, which is why it's really important that if people do feel like they want to have their child screened, to get those forms in end of this week.
But we're just so excited about this partnership, and I have 2 kids and I'm shuttling them a million places as well. We're so excited to offer this, and I think we're excited to take this first step forward to supporting some on-site services, and we hope that this will continue to grow and we can continue to work together for a really long time. So this is definitely not going to be like a short-term thing. We're hoping that we can keep this partnership going for a really long time to serve to serve this demand.
Absolutely. We're so thrilled as well. I think, as we said, our missions are aligned, and to have just another great resource for the children and families. So thank you so much, Amy and Jeanette, for joining us tonight. Thank you everyone for joining. And if people have questions, feel free to reach out after the call. And we'll be sending some follow-up emails with a link to the recording if you want to share with someone else in your family. And we'll also be following up with information about the screening permission forms. So thank you, Buttonloop, for joining us.
Thank you so much.
And have a great night, everyone.
Thank you so much for your time. I know it's hard to get away, so thank you for spending the time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.